Outro! If you're having trouble coming up with new compositions for your paintings, then I've got a really fun exercise that I can show you to practice your skills. Hi there, I'm Janine, I'm an artist and I share my creative journey on this channel. What creates a composition is basically just contrast in values. A high value contrast, so very dark and very light colours together, catches your eye's attention. To make a pleasing composition, I always use dark shapes in different sizes. I try not to have any shapes that are similar in size. The other thing I do is spread out those shapes fairly evenly. The easiest way to look at a composition is actually in black and white, because then you'll see the really dark values and the very light values really easily. I'll show you how to make black and white collage papers and then use those to create compositions in a sketchbook. I'm going to make abstract compositions, but you could definitely use that for representational work as well. Let me show you some examples of compositions on some of my paintings. This is one of my paintings. If we look at it in black and white, it's really easy to see where the dark and light values are. We have this large dark shape at the bottom, a medium one on the right, and a smaller square at the top. Then there are a few smaller darks dotted around the center. All of them are spread out fairly evenly. This one is quite colourful, but if we look at it in black and white, we can see the composition more clearly. Here's a large dark shape, a medium one, and a smaller one. An even smaller one spread around. Again, everything is spaced fairly evenly. This here is a mainly dark painting, so in this case we look at the light areas as the shapes that create the composition. Let's look at it in black and white. There's this large shape at the bottom, a medium one here and a smaller one here. Again, I've dotted around a few even smaller shapes. I want to make some collage papers first, so I don't only use pure black and white papers. That will just make it a little bit more interesting. So I obviously have black and white paint. I'm using acrylics for this. This is just copy paper. You can use any paper for this really. It's better if it's quite thin for this purpose, because otherwise the collage will get quite bulky. And then I have a range of different tools here to make marks with. You can use anything you've got, but I want to use this catalyst blade, this filbert brush. Then I've got this color shaper, it's called. It's just like a silicone nib. That makes quite interesting marks. I have a palette knife. This is a mini blade, like a silicone spatula. This flat brush and a skewer to scrape into paint. First, I'm painting a paper solid black for when I want to add a lot of contrast to a composition. Into this grey paint, I'm scraping with a palette knife to add some texture. Here the black and white paint have not fully mixed, so I'm getting this really nice marbled stripy effect. I'm enjoying a lot the marks this mini blade is making compared to the brush. It creates solid but also more transparent areas. The paint is also a bit easier to apply than with the brush, and I have to use a lot less paint. Most of the paint always stays in the brush. Then I'm adding some stripes with pure black, but varying how much paint I have on the brush. Same with these circles, where I have more paint on the brush strokes are darker, and with less paint they get lighter. On this one I want a darker background, and then add a light layer that I can scratch through to reveal the dark layer underneath. These marks I am making with the color shaper with the silicone nib. I really like using that one to scrape away fresh paint and then smear what's on the tool back onto the painting. I'm trying to use a range of values for my collage papers, which means different shades of grey, lighter and darker ones. Having a range of values allows me to create more interesting compositions later. Here I'm using white paint with the little bit of grey that's still left on my brush to make a more interesting light coloured paper. Then I keep the white paper as the background and I'm adding very uneven strokes with my filbert brush. I'm adding more black and then more light grey again to make a bit of a gradient. These are more scribbly marks, but I'm using the gradient technique again, adding darker and lighter colours as I go. This is pure black, but the mini blade is leaving some areas more transparent and therefore looking a bit lighter. I'm adding lighter grey at the bottom that mixes with the black on the paper. On this last one, I'm just getting all my tools that still have paint on them and get all the leftover paint onto the paper. Mainly because then I have to rinse less paint out of my brushes. I like to start my compositions with a very dark value because the dark colour is a high contrast to the white paper and I can see a composition emerging early. Then I'm adding visual texture, here with the dotted paper. That's quite a low contrast to the background. I find the feathered edge of this black paper really interesting. This bit of lighter grey is adding more visual texture. I like how it's a very different pattern to the dots underneath. Then I'm sticking everything down with just a simple glue stick. For the next one, I'm starting with a more high contrast pattern. These circles are very black, so they're probably going to catch your eye first. Then I'm adding a much smaller piece of the black. At this point, everything is very textured, so I'm adding a couple of light grey pieces that are much calmer. I want to create a composition that doesn't have as much dark contrast in it, so I'm starting this one with more of a mid-tone. Then I'm adding a piece that has a similar texture, but that I made with different tools. I'm adding very small pieces of black, so the grey areas are dominating. I'm moving the pieces around until the composition looks balanced. Looking back at it, I could have just added white instead of the black, so the grey would be the darkest colour, not black. This one I'm also starting with mid-tones, creating the visual texture first. Then I'm adding bold pieces of black to contrast the texture. Again, I'm making sure that the dark pieces are in different sizes and spread out fairly evenly. I'm adding the dotted texture because it looks quite similar to the texture at the bottom right, and it complements it nicely. For these last two compositions, I want to use more dark colours than light colours. I'm adding a lot of pure black using different textures. I find all the black is a bit too much high contrast for my liking though, so I'm softening it with this lighter texture. On the last one, I just want to use papers I have not used in the other compositions yet. Overall, I also want this one to be mainly dark colours. Similarly to how I usually like to use a colour in a few different places on a painting, I want to repeat this swirly shape in another place. It's looking a bit unbalanced on its own. I use this just as a practice exercise. I don't copy those compositions onto paintings, but you could definitely do that if you wanted to. The main thing to keep in mind when you're creating compositions is just that it's all about the arrangement of dark and light shapes, and that it helps to A, use shapes in different sizes, and B, spread them out fairly evenly so your composition looks balanced. Thank you so much for watching. If you try out this exercise yourself, then I would love to hear how you found it in the comments. If you found this video helpful, then please like it and consider subscribing if you want to see more of my tips.